Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard Morchoe from the Long Hill Report, and we are fortunate to have Gus Steeves here so that we can discuss where the world is going. And today we had some earth-shattering news. Her Majesty Elizabeth II has passed away. I certainly am not celebrating that, but I would speculate the Prince of Wales might be.
Possibly. He's been waiting for a long time to get to the throne, I think,
Celebrating may not be what he's doing,
yeah.
but he's not the saddest person in the world about this.
Maybe.
Now, the monarchy, the United Kingdom monarchy, has had a long history. And it's current, before the monarchy it evolved, there had to be the Norman invasion, where William the Conqueror, as he's known, William the Conqueror, was the Duke of Normandy. Mm-hmm. And that essentially meant he was the capo tutti capi of the Norman Mafia.
Pretty much.
I'm not a fan of the Anglo-Saxon monarchy in any of its forms, but Harold Godwinson more had he was more in tune with the English people. When William came across to invade and take over, he came south relatively quickly because William knew he had the interests of the peasantry at heart, so he ravaged the countryside so William would come quickly, and that helped William in an unprepared situation come to the Battle of Hastings and lose to the Norman mafioso. And that is essentially what the English monarchy was for centuries.
Well, yeah, I mean, up until they did it. Well, they did it to their own country, then they did it to Ireland, then they did it to most of the rest of the world.
Yeah,
for a long time.
It was a confidence racket. But there'll be so much encomia on TV and radio tonight about what a wonderful institution this is. It was a mafia. Now, in latter years, the ruling class of England, it evolved this way after the English Civil War, where they actually had a Hitler, Oliver Cromwell.
Yeah, right.
And but to get back for the monarchy to come back, the Stuart monarchy, they had to make a deal with a governing class in England, a governing middle class, and they did. And the monarchy came back, but eventually its power dissipated. Mm-hmm. So we have what was essentially theme park Britain on this royal family, which was basically a welfare case. But they did it. They knew to an extent, I guess they knew what they were doing, and they kept the game going. Gus, your reflection on the royal family.
I think it's kind of amazing, really, if you think about that losing Elizabeth today really means the idea that she was around, she was literally around in World War II.
Yeah.
And back when she took the throne, the British Empire was more or less still a going concern.
Yeah.
It was losing India. It would lose it soon thereafter. And so most of the other colonies would drift away in the pretty near future thereafter. But, and I think one of the more interesting facets is that how they managed to keep themselves in the public's eye in Britain as kind of almost like the favored pet poodle. in the sense, except there's one extremely well fed and very expensive pet rule.
Well, I think Elizabeth would rather be considered the pet corgi.
Whatever.
Because that was the breed she really loved. But I think your analogy is not bad at all. She was the reigning sovereign over the demise of the British Empire.
Yeah.
But who caused the demise? Winston Churchill. Now, this is going to sound very cynical, but if Winston Churchill had not been made prime minister, they probably would have come to an accommodation with the Reich, the Hitler's regime.
Okay, maybe.
To just go away, sort of. Because they fought in World War II. They dissipated their strength such that they would never be able to hold India.
Well, true.
No,
I think
no.
they were kind of doing that back in World War I. I mean, if
That was World War I was the dopiest thing ever. I think we all will agree with that.
it was pretty stupid.
And of course, they won that by the same way that Britain did not win the Second World War, but they won, and that's a stretch too, World War I by bringing in the ringers. That was us.
Us, yeah.
Now,
They did the same thing in World War II.
it was stupid for us to get into World War I,
Yeah.
because if we had not got into World War I, Adolf Hitler would have gone to his death raving in an Bavarian old soldier's home. I heard that. That's not my
Yeah, I know.
quote. I heard that elsewhere. I think it's apt.
Mm-hmm.
And the Versailles peace, which Wilson got snookered on completely.
Well, I wonder, did he really get snookered, or did he do what he intended and then purposely put it in a drawer, never actually intending to follow through with it?
Well, that's a question.
Because there's some evidence to indicate that there were plans that the U.S. government had designed, especially, for example, for the Middle East, and doing things there, for example, that would have actually supported the Arab populations there, but they didn't come to light for years afterward, purposely by intent.
That's of course speculation.
Yeah.
If Wilson meant what he said, does any president mean what he said? But
That's
if
a good
Wilson
that's a good
meant what he
question.
said, it was failure.
Mhm.
And the long after World War I, the long method of diplomacy was first Stresemann got back into the German foreign minister before Hitler came to power, and he passed away. But he skillfully got Germany back into the concert of nations.
Mhm.
Hitler,
What there was of it.
What there was.
Yeah.
Hitler, well, that's the famous phrase about after Napoleon, let's invite France back into the concert of nations. And that's what Stresemann basically did. But when Hitler came, the appeasement of Hitler, ongoing,
Mhm.
was in a way understandable because what he was saying about the Sudetenland
Mhm.
was essentially true.
And Austria, and
And
the parts of
well,
Poland
not
we were
Austria
talking
necessarily, not Austria necessarily,
Yeah.
but he didn't do anything. He didn't strong arm Austria.
about. No.
The Tsar in the West, that was true too. And what he said, and so he had every reason to suspect what he said about the Polish corridor
Yeah.
would be
probably.
recognized as true.
Yeah.
So World War II started in World War I, or started at the Treaty of Versailles by overplaying the hand, and after that Hitler was saying, well, you know what you guys did? And, so everything progressed as one would expect. Poland was not going to give in.
No, of course not.
Because,
Why would they?
because
they knew what they were facing.
Because they could get it beaten, but they could have.
They probably would have gotten beaten anyway.
Well, they could have given away the Polish corridor, which was basically German territory. had been German territory.
It had been.
And was
prior
given to
World War I,
them by the Treaty of Versailles,
Yeah.
which, because we got to give Poland access to the sea.
Mm-hmm.
No,
But they weren't about to do it by giving them Prussia.
no. Well, why should they? You know, or East Prussia. Why should they?
That's what I meant. Yeah.
So, you know, they set up the world for World War II.
Yeah.
But Poland could have said, I doubt it. I don't know if Hitler was ready to give some compromise, but they could have said, well, you know, that's right. This isn't our territory.
I mean, I think the Poles at that time were more concerned actually about duking it out with the Russians
And well, they should have been.
over parts of
well,
what are
then-
now Belarus and Western Ukraine.
Well, then it would be reasonable to say, well, okay, Dolph, short for Adolf.
Yeah.
Okay, Dolph, what kind of deal can we make? Because, you know, there's always the speculation that Hitler wanted to go east anyway to take on because he feared the Soviet Union himself, which, well, he might have. So, you know, overthinking in World War One with what we give everybody else, what we take away from Germany because we wanna hamstring Germany, didn't work out that well.
Well, I think part of the problem wasn't overthinking, was not thinking enough.
Well, isn't
In
that
World War
overthinking?
One.
Well, I mean, you know, thinking how do we hamstring Germany was kind of overthinking.
Well, to some, yeah, I guess that's true because we have a track record of doing that
Well,
and trying to figure out how we're going to hamstring country blank
that is
by doing X, Y, and Z, and then it turns around and backfires, like what's going on right now with Russia.
that's absolutely true. Which, if you think about it, is a reason, and I have written about this, not blowing my own head, to close down the State Department. I mean, tell me how we would be worse off without a State Department.
With the people that are currently in the State Department?
Well,
Probably not.
you know, what are you going to get? I mean, I'm now appointing Gus Steeves to pick the next State Department. You couldn't do worse. I'll give you that. But
Probably not.
you know, what happens after Gus Steeves? Now, okay,
I don't know.
I know the State Department is never going to be closed down. No matter how many nights I spend on my knees praying it is. But our foreign policy is a history of failure. And I can mention right now my book, She Searches for Monsters to Destroy American Foreign Policy and the Internal Recurrence of Unnecessary Wars. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at morepress.com. It basically makes that point.
Yeah.
American foreign policy is one mistake after another. And the current foreign policy, unless Gus wants to say, absolutely, you're wrong, Richard, is still a mistake. Gus doesn't want to say that.
No, because it's true. I mean, that's part of the problem. And you think about, to go back to the English monarchy thing for a moment, I think it's interesting that you look over the years and how the monarchy's cachet faded over the years. And we kind of borrowed it, and we frittered it away too in our policy of doing more or less the same kinds of things that they did, because we didn't learn anything from it.
No.
And we're showing it now as things creep toward, hopefully not toward total catastrophe in Eastern Europe, but there's all little signs of, I don't think anybody knows where anything's going over there right now. That's the problem.
Well,
we just know that there's every intentions in our government and in Britain to stymie any sort of a peace process for as long as they can.
yes. And they think they're smart. I tend to think Blinky, what's his name?
Blinken or
Blinken. I don't know. I forget his first name.
Lincoln, Blinken, and Nod.
Oh,
That is our State Department.
Jake Sullivan. You want to call it overthinking or underthinking? I don't care.
Right.
That's not good thinking.
No.
And you know, the Trump administration did some terrible things in foreign policy. But Blinken and Sullivan are doing their best to do a lot worse. And nobody's just, I mean, Congressman, I know he's not your congressman. I believe Neil is your congressman.
Neil is, yeah.
Congressman McGovern claims he's a peace guy, and he's supporting all of this.
Well,
who's he kidding?
I know, but well, that's part of the problem is that there are so many of the more. I can't really call them liberal. I can't really call them left because they're definitely not on the left. Of the quasi-progressives in Congress, sometimes say the right things, but the system has so completely corrupted everybody in Congress that they can say what they want. They can file bills that would, if they were ever passed, maybe do something good, but they never get passed, and they know they won't.
Yeah.
At best, they'll end up in a drawer somewhere. But because the show is being run down there by corporate interest and just naked greed. And those are the kind of people who cannot think of what anybody else might see a situation as, especially not somebody they're doing everything they possibly can to label as Satan incarnate,
Well,
namely Putin and the Russians. That we don't have a foreign policy that is even sane anymore.
my point.
If it ever has been.
My point. When you say corporate interest, I would say corporativist interest in that, say like a John Deere as a corporation. I think they're actually a positive good. Goldman Sachs as a corporate interest, positive, negative,
Yeah,
absolute
okay,
evil.
Absolutely.
Anything involved with the military-industrial complex is corporativist, which is
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the distinction really matters when you get to that level of corporate size, because I mean, like for example, you mentioned John Deere, I don't think they've done. I mean, obviously they're not too heavily involved in the situation in Ukraine, as far as I know. Although there's been some talk about the idea of the situation in Ukraine partially, at least, being driven by big ag in our country, because of their interest in all the fertile farmland out there.
How about the interest in, or the big ag, not big ag, but the interest in shutting down the Dutch farmers? Now that can't help the tractor industry.
Probably not, but
Where's that coming from?
I don't know.
You think it might be something, when you say big ag,
I'm thinking of like the giant stock
Archer
market
Daniels
type,
Midland
Archer
type.
Daniels Midland and
I am
Cargills
thinking
and
that,
John
yeah.
Deere's and those kinds of people.
Well, John Deere is a machinery maker.
I know.
The other ones are I wouldn't put John Deere in that class.
Okay. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily squeaky clean either, because they do have a history in recent years of trying to do everything they can to undermine the ability of farmers to fix their own tractors.
That is I did not know that, but that is terrible.
And the problem is that's true of most of the tech companies. Most of the high tech creation, they're doing everything they can to force you to go to their repair people.
Yes,
and of course they funnel the profits to the home office. That's what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes right back to the fact that a large percentage of our economy is controlled by the octopus tentacles of a relatively few very large corporations. Or the investors therein.
I would say it's more of the banking interests.
Yeah, a lot of them are.
Goldman and the Morgan and a few of those. I mean, just take a look at who controls most of the communications. It's what, 6 companies or something?
Yeah.
It explains why we are not on Coast to Coast TV
Sure.
or being beamed to Europe. But anyway, we just soldier on here.
Well, and I think it's interesting is that in how many cases you look at, and I've only glanced at the list, so I can't say I've done a lot of research into it, but how many of those major corporations, they share people on their boards of directors.
Oh, of course.
So it's a relatively small group, maybe 1,000 or so, 2,000 maybe, of the world's mostly richest people have a significant influence in all of these major corporations. If you combine them all, they'll sit on 6 boards over here and 4 boards over there, and the names change on each board. But if you look at the aggregate, it's a small group of people. And it's been like that for a long time.
So, and if you grant that, and I would say it's more accurate than I would like to think.
Yeah, me too.
What is the Gus Steeves solution?
Honestly, I wish I knew. Because it's gotten to be so convoluted. I would love to see us take advantage of the fact that the people greatly outnumber those kinds of sociopathic criminals and break them up. I'm just not sure how we go about doing it.
Well, last month I gave you the thought experiment. And I don't think it's the best thought experiment in the world, but it's not the worst either, of Fenway Park.
Right.
And we got the 30,000, and it's all, people, poor people in the bleachers,
Yeah, I know.
rich people up in the box, and not so rich in the box seats, and then the average in the regular grandstand.
Well, I think part of the key that we need to do is spread those people around, so that they're not all rich people up here and poor people over here and the middle class over here, because we keep creating this distinctions
But
we're also ignoring them. The media does not address the true class issues that are rampant in our country.
Just like in the Soviet Union, they didn't address
That's true. That is true.
And nobody really wants to. But my point in making this is to say there is no, when you just said it again, my favorite bad word, we. Because there is no we. Maybe there should be. We should all be able, maybe, I used we again, we should all be able to come together and reasonably understand this. And think about the way things are.
Mm-hmm.
But it ain't going to happen because there is no we. The guys in the bleachers are different from the guys in the grandstand.
Not necessarily. I think there's a fair amount of common interest
There might
in
be
all of
common
these groups.
interest.
The issue is pulling together, trying to identify what those interests are. If you can weed out and we kind of mentioned this last time about the propaganda manipulation going on, pull people, try to figure out what they're actually interested in, what their goals really are. And you can work toward those as a society.
How could you do that? This is why, I asked you the question, what's your assignment to be graded later on in the semester? Yeah, reasonably, how do we get to the commonality of interest? Because I don't think the people in the bleachers, okay, let me give you an example. It happened, I'm guessing maybe 10 years ago. There was a theater in Ware, the casino. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It was a movie theater.
Okay.
The guy was kind of trying to save it. He wasn't the biggest genius in the world. In fact, he wasn't a genius at all. He's trying to save it. And it failed.
Okay.
And the day of they knocked it down. They had bulldozers and everything, knocked it down. One guy who was definitely part of the proletariat started saying how the guy was a total jerk and really ridiculous. And I was laughing and glad that the theater was being knocked down. That was against his interests. Even if the guy was
But
not a genius. Maybe somebody could have come along and I was part of the group that tried to work with that and help in a
Yeah.
small way. I had no real influence. He's talking against his own interests.
And that does unfortunately
How,
happen.
on the bleachers, even up in probably in the long run, up in the boxes, they don't always know their own interests.
That is true, but,
But in the
taking,
bleachers,
but
they
taking
give-
one person out of context, just because one person spouts off about against their own interests,
Nah,
does not
that
mean
was- that
that
was-
other people
that
around
was
them
the
don't
tenor.
recognize the issue.
That was the tenor.
That may be true, and unfortunately, how much of that spouting against people's own interests is actually being driven by propaganda, by powerful interests purposely confusing us
You can always
on
quote,
what actually is our interest.
You can always quote me. All news is propaganda.
It is, unfortunately.
And there's not going to be, what was it Plato said? Only the dead do not know war. Well, only the dead don't know propaganda. And there's always going to be a party line.
True.
And at the end of the day, like I would say and I'm willing to argue a lot about this, that my bias is libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
Do I know everything to say I am an absolute libertarian? No. I don't know anything to say I'm an absolute anything.
Right.
But I would say most of the things that government has ever done don't work. And some of them work okay. Like the MBTA, I would go to work in an accounting firm in downtown Boston. I love the MBTA.
Yeah.
You know why I love the MBTA? Because it broke down. And I could read. I could read. And I'd come to work. Oh, the Green Line one was down? Yeah, boy, I was on that train for a long time. And it was great. And I hope my boss my ex-boss, the fellow
That's
I
a moot
work
point
for,
at this point. Yeah.
never sees this. But you got to work. It got people around.
Yeah.
Now, healthcare, if you like government health, or if you want government health care, you're going to get the MBTA of healthcare. And I was talking with my cousins. I talk every month with my first cousins. We all don't have brothers. We have sisters, but we don't so well. We're closest as brothers we have. And I said, and the thing about it, it's probably going to be tolerable. Most people will live. And he said, that's the slogan for it. Most people will live. But you have to recognize, if you want that, you're getting the MBTA of healthcare.
Well, the catch is, aren't we getting that with private healthcare too? Because they're doing everything they can to financialize our entire hospital system in this country, and they're doing exactly the same thing that you're accusing public healthcare of doing. Because we do not actually have a public healthcare system.
We don't.
We've got a privatized and corrupted and slowly being massacred from the inside healthcare system.
I would guess that it's better the way it is now. It may not. It's probably on the road to hell, but I would guess it's better because I had lots of family needing health care. I've needed health care.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. Mm-hmm. Now that you may say, well, you got the privilege at my age. You're on Social Security and what's the Medicare? Mm-hmm. I'm on Medicare.
I benefited from last year. Last year was a horrible year, and I actually got pretty good care.
Yeah, and I have
and paid very little.
I paid very little.
And it wasn't because of private insurance Medicare system, a medical system.
I have a supplemental. Mm-hmm. It's all good. It's all not bad. I think some states they do better than others.
That is true, and that's part of the problem.
But I think this probably that everything in this so-called economy is tending toward not good.
I would agree. For a variety of reasons. Some of it's being pirated. Some of it is because of resource constraints. Some of it is because of the fact that we are increasingly having people who are running the system who, quite frankly, don't know what they're doing.
But that's true about all governments.
It's also true of most corporations. I mean, what is a corporation but a private government?
It's a private government, and some corporations, unless they get government support, go out of business.
That's often true.
That's
Did you hear what you just said? Unless they get government support, they go out of business.
if they do not run the corporation well.
The problem is they often don't run the corporation well before or after getting government support. You'll have the founder of a corporation has an idea of what they're doing, and they know what they're doing, and their hands are still involved in it, and their staff is relatively small, and they're still kind of working together. But when they start getting to be really big and start getting to be beyond an actual personal relationship among the people who are working there, and it starts getting to the point where it's all about how much money they can make for their shareholders and their investors, that's when you start seeing companies go rapidly in the basket to hell.
To rebut, we have a very short time, but to rebut slightly, I dislike Jeff Bezos.
Me too.
I find him a disgusting person.
And Elon Musk.
But I need something. He gets it right to me, and he gets it at a good price. Now you can go into that might not be societally good and everything, but he provides a service, and Holy Mother State could never do that.
I don't think that's necessarily true. Prove that the state can't do it. And we are in a system where the corporations have done everything they can to make it impossible for the state to do it.
Well,
by sucking off the most talented people, by undermining the government's ability to do virtually everything with decades and decades of anti-government propaganda.
Okay,
and
why do we have no more Soviet Union?
Because it went bankrupt.
Because it didn't work. And what they did.
But it's not because the idea is necessarily a bad idea.
Well, they had years and years of pro-government propaganda.
So do we.
But that's true.
And our system is very rapidly following the path the Soviet Union had because it's being corrupted.
I will never argue with anybody about the corruption of the U.S. government.
Yeah.
But
and theirs was the same kind of corrupt gerontocracy in the 1980s that ours is now, with many of the same attitudes toward the rest of the world, and blowing smoke up everyone's behinds about how wonderful they are.
I just was spoke
and getting armed to the teeth.
Spoke for a half hour with somebody who I disagree with as to where the direction is going.
Mm-hmm.
I think he makes his case well, but I disagree. About the political system, it is horribly corrupt,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think that is necessarily an aspect of business. And before the powers that be come after us, we have to say au revoir to the audience.
Adios.
We want to thank you for coming by, and we will have more to say next month. The Long Hill Report, your host Richard Morchoe and Gus Steeves. Thank you.
Have a good night.